Reading data from and writing data to a file are very common activities in our day-to-day life. In this lesson, you will learn how to work with files using Python. Make sure to stick to the end because we are going to create a program that reads IP addresses from a file, goes over to the internet to look for locations corresponding to those IP addresses, and then adds that information back into the initial file. By the end of this lesson, you will have confidence in working with files. When working with files, 3 steps are involved. The first step is to open the file, read information from or write information to the file, and finally close the file. Before you can read or write a file, you have to open it using Python's built-in open function. This function creates a file object that will be used for further operations. Let's declare a variable called file object. File object equals the open function open. The first argument you need to pass to the open function is the file name. To specify the file name, you can use either the absolute or the relative path. A relative path refers to a specific file from the current working directory, which is the directory where your Python script is located. An absolute path provides a complete sequence of directories from the root of the file system to a specific subfile. If we create a file in the current folder where this Python script is located, then we can simply mention the name of the file, and that serves as the relative path. The name of the file is sample.txt. Sample.txt. To determine the absolute path, you can use the pwd command in the terminal. This displays the full path from the root directory. Another way to obtain the absolute path is to right-click on the file, then click copy path. Now let's move back to our Python script. Ctrl V. So this is the absolute path, which is the same as the full path of the file. The next step is to specify the mode, which could be read, write, append, and so on. In this case, we can leave the mode as arg since we only intend to read from the file. Now we have the file objects, and there are various methods available to be used. Make sure to check the free PDF guide to see the full list. When you call the read method on a file object, it returns the entire content of the file in the form of a single string. Let's declare a new variable called file_data, file data equals file objects dot read, which is the read method. Let's print out the type and the content of the file data. Print type file data, print file data. Now let's execute the program. This indicates that the read method returns the content as a string. The type of the file data is a string, and this is the content. This shows what we have in the file. Now let's use the readLines method. ReadLines. Let's run the program. The readLines method returns a list of all the lines in a file. Each item in the list represents a single line. Python plus a new line. Django plus a new line. /n is an escape sequence that represents a new line. Now let's use a for loop to print the content on the screen. For line in file data. Print line. Remember that file data is a list data type. Line.strip. The strip method removes white spaces from the start and end of a string. Let's run the program again. Great, we now have the content of the file printed on the screen. So that's how we can open a file and read the content of the file. We've used Python to open a file, work on the file, but we haven't closed it. Remember that the last step is to close the file. Once you have finished your work, the closed attribute on a file object indicates whether a file is closed or not. Let's make use of the closed attribute to know whether the file is opened or closed. File objects.closed. Let's comment out this part of the code. Let's execute the program again. This shows that the file is not closed. The close method is responsible for closing the opened file, while closed is an attribute that signifies whether the file is closed or not. File object.close. On this line, which is line 8, we are closing the file. Let's run the program again. Fantastic. The closed attribute shows that the file has been closed. Before we proceed, a better way to work with files is to use a context manager. When you use the with keyword, resources such as file closing are automatically managed for you. This approach involves manual closing of the file. If an error occurs before we get to the point of closing the file will remain open. So let's use a better approach. Let me zoom out. We need to use the with keyword with, then copy this part of the code here as file objects. I'm just going to comment out all we have here. File data equals, then we can now make use of the for loop on the file data for line in file data print line dot strip. Now let's execute the program. Great, we have the same result. If any error occurs, Python will automatically close the file for you. Another point to mention is that using read and read lines is not ideal for working with large data sets because they load the entire file object into memory at once. So if you are working with a file containing thousands of lines, it would be better to loop through the file one line at a time to minimize memory usage. Let's put that into practice. We are going to comment out this file data. Then we can say for line in file objects. This is how you are going to write your code if you are working with a large data set. Let's execute the program. We have the same result. The file is automatically closed outside of this with block. We can confirm that by using the closed attribute outside of the with block. Let's try that out. Print file objects dot closed. Let's execute the program again. As you can see, the file has been closed by Python because we are using context manager. Writing to a file is similar to reading. We need to mention that the mode is right and use the appropriate methods. With open, the name of the file, let's call it sample2.txt, sample2.txt. The mode is right as file objects dot write hi, a new line. If a file does not exist, the write method will create it, but if it exists, it first deletes the content of that file before writing a new content into it. So you should be careful when using the write mode. The write method does not add a new line character to the end of the string. You must do it manually. Print done. Let's comment out this other part of the code. Now let's execute the program. Done. The name of the file is sample2.txt. Let's look for the file sample2.txt. A new file has been created with the name sample2.txt. Just to show you that you need to manually add a new line, you will see that the write method does not add a new line. Let's execute the program again. Let's go back to sample2.txt. As you can see, all the contents are written on a single line. The second method you can use is writelines. Writelines writes a list of strings to a file without adding a line separator. File object dot writelines. Then we pass in the list we want to write. Hi again. Save the file and run the program again. The two strings have been written to the file. The append mode is similar to the write mode. You have to signify that the mode is append by writing letter A. If the file exists, it starts writing to the file from the last line. If the file does not exist, it creates a new file for writing. Writing in append mode is recommended when you don't want the initial content of the file to be overwritten. You just need to specify the mode as A, and that's all. We've already created sample2.txt. It contains 2 lines. What we want to do now is to write a new line to sample2.txt. Let's add a new line before writing the content. Let's execute the program. Let's go and check sample2.txt. Great, we have hi written to the last line. Alright friends, let's start the project exercise. The requirement states that given a file containing IP addresses, a program should be written to fetch the locations and save them into the same file. I have discovered that this website can be utilized to obtain the location associated with a given IP address. Before starting any coding exercise, make sure to document your steps to stay organized. I have listed a couple of steps needed. The first step is to read the IP addresses from the original file. Next, for each IP address, make an API call to the IP info website to retrieve the location. Finally, save the IP address and its corresponding location back into the file. Before making a network call to a website, ensure the request library is installed. You can install it by typing pip install requests. Press enter on the keyboard. Requirement already satisfied means that the library is already installed on my system. Now let's move on. Let's declare a variable to hold the name of the file containing the IP addresses. File underscore path equals the name of the file is IP underscore addresses.txt equals IP.txt. This is the name of the file containing the IP addresses we want to work with. Now let's read the content of the file. We can make use of the open function with open, then the name of the file, which is file path. The mode, we need to specify the mode to be read as file object. IP addresses equals, which is a new variable, equals for line in file objects line.strip. For each line in the file object, line.strip should be added to the new list. Here we are using list comprehension to perform iteration over the file object. For now, let's print out the IP addresses. Print IP addresses, IPs. Let's execute the program to see the progress. Great. So we've been able to read the content of the file, which is this file, and save it into a new variable, IP addresses. The next step involves getting the locations for these IP addresses. For each IP address in the IP addresses, we need to make an API call to the IP info website. Let's create a function that takes an IP address and return the location. We are going to call it def, which is a new function, get underscore location. It takes an IP address as the parameter address pass. Let's head over to the IP info documentation. This URL returns the location as plain text based on a given IP address. So that's what we need. I think you may want to check out this link. Let's declare a new variable URL equals fstrings https. This part is the IP address. We can replace it with the IP address response equals requests dot get the URL. On this line, which is line 5, we are using the request library to make an API call to this URL. Let's import request, which is the library we've installed. Import requests if response dot status code equals 200 data equals response dot text else data equals not found. Whenever you make an API call to a URL, the status code indicates the status of your API call. A status code of 200 means everything is fine. If it is not 200, we want to set the location as not found. Let's return data. Now we have a function. Given an IP address, it returns the location. Let's make use of this get location function. Locations equals for IP in IP addresses. We want to call the get function location with the specific IP address. For each IP in the IP addresses, this function will be called and the result will be added to this list. We are also making use of list comprehension on this line. Be sure to check out the lesson on comprehensions to know more about how comprehensions work. Let's print the location to the terminal. Print locations. Let's execute the program to see the progress. Great, we have the locations returned 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You might notice that there is a delay before the locations are returned from the API. The first reason is that this code is synchronous, meaning it processes requests one after the other. The next call to the IP info website would not start until the first one is complete. We can leverage asynchronous programming to address these delays. However, this topic has not been covered yet. As a bonus, the code for the asynchronous version will be provided in the description below. The second reason for the delay might be that the website takes some time to return the location due to network or internet connectivity issues. The final step is to write the locations into the same file. For simplicity, we are just going to overwrite the file by using write mode. Let's open the file again with open the file path. We need to specify the mode as write, W as write file object. So we have two lists, one containing the IP addresses and the other containing the locations. The zip function will iterate through the two lists in parallel and return a tuple containing items from each list. Let's make use of the zip function to loop through the two lists in parallel. For IP underscore address, location in zip of IP addresses and locations. Write file objects dot write f strings IP address location. When we open the existing file on this line, the file will be overwritten because we are using W. Now let's execute the program again to see what happens. Alright, so now let's go and check the initial file. Great, we now have IP addresses and the cities. The CSV format is the most common import and export format for databases and spreadsheets. This means whenever you want to import data into or export data from the database, you would come across the CSV format. If you open a CSV format with Excel or LibreOffice, it looks similar to this. To read a data from a CSV file, we need to use the open function as usual. With open, the name of the file and the mode as file object. We first need to import the CSV module. Import CSV. You don't need to install any package here because CSV comes with Python. Now you need to declare a new variable reader or any suitable name equals CSV.reader. Then you need to pass in the file objects. For name level in reader, print f strings name level. Now let's execute the program. Great, we've been able to read the content of the CSV file. If you notice, the headers of the CSV file, which are name and level, are also returned here. So what you can do to avoid that is to use the next function. Next. Then you pass in the reader. Let's execute the program again. It works. You are able to use the next function on reader or a file object, because a file object is an iterator, which means it produces its elements one at a time. Calling the next function on it will return the first line, which is the header. Writing to a CSV format is similar to reading. You need to use the open function, the name of the file, and the mode. The mode needs to be W, which is for writing, as file objects. Then you say writer equals CSV.writer. Then you pass the file object to it. Now you have a CSV writer which can be used to write into the file. We can say writer.write role to write a single role into the CSV format. Then you pass a list of columns you want to write, name, level. This will serve as the headers. Now we want to write a new row into the CSV, a new row, level equals to 10 as well. Now let's execute this program to see what happens. Alright, so now let's go and check if a new file has been created. Sample2.csv. Sample2.csv. Let's check the content. Great, we have the exact content written into it. For more practice questions, be sure to check the description below. Subscribe, like, and comment. Thanks.